Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the underbrush of Greek mythology's soft moss underfoot, whispering leaves above, and somewhere out there, the faint trill of a wooden flute. You're not alone. There's something or someone watching. Horned, hooved, a little too awake for this hour. You're following Pan, the ancient Greek god of the wild, who, for all his chaotic energy and party-crashing habits, has one strangely relatable problem. He absolutely cannot sleep without his flute. He's tried. He's tossed. He's turned. He's even counted sheep, which is doubly awkward because he is part sheep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments, just to prove you're not the only one wide awake, thinking about flute-obsessed forest gods. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge quietly behind Pan now. He doesn't notice, or maybe he just doesn't care. The trees press close on either side. It's late, and he should be asleep. But he's not. His hooves click softly on stones, and his long fingers keep twitching, like they miss the feeling of reeds between them. The forest is his home, but not always his comfort. There are too many thoughts here, too many spaces between the sounds. And Pan, more than most gods, hates silence. He's tried lying still in a nest of ferns, under branches heavy with dew. He's tried curling up next to a herd of sheep, their breath warm and steady. But even their sleepy bleats fade eventually, and when they do, when the quiet settles in fully, it feels like the whole world forgets him, like the air stops holding his shape. That's when he pulls out the flute. It's not always the same one. He makes them constantly out of reeds, bones, hollowed olive twigs, anything that can hum back at him. You watch as he reaches into a leather satchel slung across his shaggy shoulder and pulls out a battered panpipe. The edges are chewed, possibly by goats, possibly by Pan. He raises it to his lips. The sound is uneven, breathy, more sigh than song. But it's enough. Enough to break the stillness. Enough to remind the trees he's still here. He plays a few crooked notes and exhales, tension slipping off his bare chest like mist. That's the trick. You realize he's not playing music. He's making presence, carving a space in the silence where he still exists. You've probably done the same thing humming to yourself in a dark hallway, whistling in the kitchen at 2 just to make sure the room doesn't swallow you. Historians still argue whether Pan was originally a major deity or just a glorified goat mascot who got promoted. But one thing's clear, he was always noisy and always needed. The flute helps, but it doesn't fix things. Not fully. Pan wanders deeper into the woods. You follow him through a narrow trail lined with moon-bleached stones. Somewhere, an owl hoots. Somewhere else, a branch snaps. Pan tenses, not because he's scared, but because for one brief second, something else made a sound, something that wasn't him. And that's the one thing worse than silence competition. You pass an old altar now, just a pile of stacked rocks with some rusted coins and dried berries. It smells faintly of goat sweat and fennel. Once, shepherds left offerings here to keep Pan from spooking their flocks. They believed if you didn't acknowledge him, he'd do what he did best, cause panic. Yes, that's where the word comes from. Pan plus ice. You're welcome. Pan doesn't stop at the altar. He just gives it a sideways glance, like you'd give an ex's birthday post. Then he keeps walking. You wonder, does he even want sleep? He doesn't yawn. He doesn't stumble. He doesn't curl up beneath the trees like a bear or a bard who's had one too many goblets. Instead, he moves with purpose. Not quite a sprint, but not the meander of a dreamer either. It's possible, and this is a fringe theory, whispered mostly by extremely tired folklorists, that Pan doesn't need sleep at all. That sleep, to him, is just another way humans vanish. That music is his rebellion against it, or his lullaby, or both. You pause now, kneeling beside a stream. Pan does the same. He washes his face, stares into the rippling water. For a moment, his reflection doubles horned and haloed in silver moonlight. You almost feel bad for him. He's the god of wild places, but he's never still. The forests rest. The fields go quiet, but Pan plays. One scholar once wrote, Pan is the laughter between madness and melody, which sounds impressive, until you realize they also claimed Pan invented kazoo choirs. Grain of salt, obviously. Still, the idea sticks. Pan stands up, flute back to his lips, another note. This one lower, more deliberate. It echoes. And then something strange, a second flute, faint. Bars from deeper in the woods. Pan stops. So do you. He tilts his head. He knows that sound. It's his. And that's where tonight's journey really begins. You stay low behind the twisted trunk of an olive tree, watching Pan freeze mid-step. That flute, faint, off-tempo, wandering slightly out of tune, still drifts through the trees. Not just an echo, not a bird, not wind. It's someone playing. Pan's whole posture shifts. His goat legs brace. His ears twitch like a deer listening for thunder. The wild god isn't used to being answered, especially not with his own voice. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. You just follow, drawn by his sudden, urgent silence. Through ferns slick with dew and roots that grab at your ankles like lazy snakes, the two of you descend toward the sound. It curls through the trees like smoke light. Reedy, cautious. Whoever's playing isn't trying to show off. They're trying not to be alone. Which, frankly, is a very Pan thing to do. Eventually, you reach a small clearing wrapped in bramble and moonlight. There, sitting cross-legged beside a fallen log, is a boy, mortal, maybe 12. His hair's a mess, his tunic's ripped. He plays a handmade flute with more heart than skill, eyes half closed as if trying to play himself to sleep. Pan stops at the edge of the clearing, doesn't move. The boy misses a note, frowns, tries again. Pan steps forward, one hoof crunching a twig. The boy looks up, flute still pressed to his lips, sees the horned god, freezes. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathes. Then Pan raises his flute and plays, not loud, not perfect, just one soft, fluttering note that drifts across the clearing like a question. The boy answers with another shaky phrase, and that's how the night goes. Call and response, a sleepy duet between panic and hope. You settle in beside a mossy stone, feeling more like an accidental audience member than a participant. But that's okay. Pan doesn't need worship. He just needs someone to hear him, and maybe to be heard back. Now, here's a fact you didn't ask for. Pan's instrument isn't technically a flute. It's a syrinx, named after the nymph, who turned into reeds to avoid him. But more on her later. For now, just know that each pipe in Pan's instrument is a different length and therefore a different note. He binds them together with wax or twine, sometimes even goat sinew, depending on the century and whether he's feeling extra rustic. Historians still argue whether the syrinx predates the lyre or came after, and whether its invention was divine inspiration or just the result of a very bored shepherd whittling on a lunch break. What we do know is that Pan's flute became wildly popular, especially among lonely folks, farmers, herders, the kind of people stuck in long, quiet landscapes with nothing but goats, weather, and their thoughts, which, to be honest, is a recipe for either poetry or psychosis. The boy now tries a faster tune. Pan matches and then adds a flourish at the end, just to remind the kid who's boss. The boy grins, and just like that, you get it. This isn't about music. It's about attention, not fame, not applause, just the feeling of existing while someone else is listening. It's probably why you clicked on this video in the first place. Pan plays softer now. His notes drift and stretch, like he's winding down or maybe testing the edge of the dream. The boy yawns. His fingers slip. His flute drops into the grass. He curls against the log and begins to sleep. Pan watches for a while, then tiptoes hoof-toes, to the flute. He picks it up gently, cradles it in his calloused hands. It's crude. The holes are uneven. The reeds are brittle, but it works. And that's the magic. There's an old Greek folk belief, probably not true, but fun to imagine that Pan could breathe life into a flute. That after he played one, it would always echo back some part of him. A fragment, a shadow, a breath caught in the wood. Not a curse, not a blessing, just a memory of noise. He pockets the boy's flute and leaves his own beside the child. A quiet trade. You trail after him again, back into the woods, the darkness, the dew, and then, somewhere between a pine grove and a collapsed stone altar, Pan stops and sits, cross-legged like the boy, flute in hand. He doesn't play, just holds it, because sometimes, even the god of noise needs a moment of quiet. A tiny spider rappels from a low-hanging branch, lands on Pan's knee. He doesn't flick it away, just stares at it. You wonder what he's thinking. Maybe about the first time he ever made music. It wasn't a grand gesture, no lightning bolts, or heavenly applause. Just reeds, wind, frustration, and probably a squirrel screaming in the background. One theory fringe, but charming, is that Pan made his first flute out of reeds he accidentally sat on. The flattened stalks made a sound when he shifted his weight. And curious, he bent them into shape and blew, and then did it again and again. Soon he had a scale, then a song, then a habit, and then he never stopped. Because once you find something that drowns out the silence, it's hard to let it go. Pan tilts his head, presses the boy's flute to his lips, and plays once more. It's a clumsy sound, off-key, a little too human, but it echoes beautifully. The moon shifts behind a cloud, and suddenly the forest is dimmer, quieter, like it's holding its breath. You and Pan sit in that breathless pause together. The boy's flute still hangs loose in his hand, warm from playing, but something's changed in his gaze. He's not just remembering music anymore, he's remembering her. Syrinx. Ah, yes, the nymph who said no. You've heard versions. Maybe some dreamy, some tragic, some flat-out awkward. But tonight, let's walk it through gently. Pan had heard of her long before he saw her. Everyone had. Syrinx was famous, in that mythological small-town kind of way, daughter of river gods, sharp-tongued, swift-footed, and, critically, not interested. Nymphs had a habit of being pursued in ancient tales, but Syrinx took it a step further. She made vows of chastity. No gods, no mortals, no one. Pan, of course, found this intriguing. You know the type. Can have any flower in the meadow but fixates on the one that's already locked her petals shut. He spotted her once at the edge of a riverbank, collecting herbs in a woven basket, humming, and like a goat-legged Romeo with too much free time and not enough impulse control, he fell instantly, wildly, unnecessarily in love. Now, this next part historians still argue whether it was a literal chase or a metaphor for obsession. Some versions say he tried to woo her with music first, played her love songs on a brand new flute, whispered compliments, promised wildflowers, offered to braid her hair. She bolted. Pan gave chase. The forest blurred. Syrinx, desperate, sprinted to the river where her sisters lived. She cried out for help, and just as Pan reached for her, poof, she vanished. Transformed, melted into the very reeds by the water's edge. He stood there, panting, baffled, probably wondering if he had imagined her. But then the wind came. It blew through the reeds. They sang, not just a rustle or whisper, but an actual tone, eerie and hollow and beautiful. Pan reached out, touched the reeds, felt her voice in them. And because he's Pan, part poet, part chaos, he plucked those reeds, cut them, measured them by finger length, bound them with wax, and made the first syrinx. So yes, his flute was literally made from the body of a woman who turned into plants to avoid him. Totally romantic, right? Quick reminder. This myth was written by ancient men with questionable ideas about courtship. But here's the thing. Pan didn't build the flute as a trophy. He didn't parade it through villages or demand statues in his honor. He played it quietly, for hours, for years, and not just love songs, lullabies, morning notes, the kind of melodies that say, I wish I hadn't chased you, I just didn't know what else to do with my wanting. Some fringe theorists claim Pan talks to Syrinx through the flute, that when he plays, he's not performing, he's apologizing, that the breath he pushes through those reeds is his penance, gentle, endless, unreturned. You watch him now, flute resting on his knees, eyes distant. He's thinking of her, still, after centuries, thousands of nymphs in the woods, and he still hears only one name in the reeds. It's the kind of grief that doesn't rage. It hums, and here's a mainstream fact for you. The image of Pan and Syrinx was wildly popular in ancient Greek pottery and Roman sculpture. They loved the story's contrast, chase and stillness, wild god and silent plant. Artists carved scenes of her transformation on everything from urns to coins, because nothing says romance like a flute born from botanical heartbreak. Pan stands now, slowly, like the memory made his legs heavier. He tucks the boy's flute into his satchel and picks up his own Syrinx's flute. The original, or at least, the one he keeps remaking in her memory. The wind shifts, and the reeds along the creek begin to sway again. They murmur to each other in low, rhythmic pulses. You swear it almost sounds like a name. Syrinx. He walks on. You follow, stepping carefully between mossy stones and sleep-drowsy frogs. The forest grows darker, denser. But Pan doesn't light a torch. He doesn't need to. The flute is his lantern, his map, his shield. Each note he plays becomes a small spell, not magic in the zap you from a distance sense, but in the old way making meaning out of breath. Each tone says, I'm still here, I remember you, I won't go quiet yet. You wonder how many flutes has he made? How many reeds have carried her name? Some say he only ever uses 7. Others claim he builds new ones every spring, letting the old ones rot in the riverbanks as offerings. And then there's the very niche, very charming theory that Pan loses his flutes constantly, that he leaves them behind like breadcrumbs in every glade, hoping someone else will pick them up. Maybe play them, maybe dream with them, maybe remember her. You pause on a hill now, wind picking up. Below you is a field, dotted with sleeping sheep and one lone shepherd snoring under a fig tree. Pan doesn't disturb him. He just watches. Maybe he remembers a time when he was the sound in every shepherd's sleep, when flutes meant peace, not pain, when he played because he loved it, not because silence clawed at him. The boy's flute presses against his side through the satchel. Pan sighs, not in sorrow, just in rhythm. Like the world keeps playing a song he never quite finishes, the stars shift as you follow Pan into the hills barefoot, weightless, as if the forest itself exhales around you. He's not heading anywhere obvious. No temples, no shrines, just deeper into Arcadia, his wild, eternal homeland. And if you've never heard of Arcadia, think of it as the original cabin in the woods fantasy, minus plumbing and with a lot more goat-based anxiety. Arcadia was a real region in ancient Greece, mountainous, remote, famously stubborn about being civilized. While Athens invented theater and democracy, Arcadia raised sheep and blamed ghosts for poor crop yields. People here didn't build statues for gods, they left them cheese. Pan fits here perfectly. He was born here, supposedly, though historians still argue whether his mother was a nymph, a mortal, or just a mythic placeholder, for we have no idea. His father, according to one camp, was Hermes. Others claim he just appeared, fully horned and giggling, in the crook of a tree. That feels more accurate. You trail behind him through tall grass, listening to the night sigh. The silence is full but never safe. You get the sense that in Arcadia, the air always holds its breath around Pan, like the land remembers. Remember that time he spooked an entire army? It's a lesser-known episode, but Pan once allegedly caused full-on battlefield panic literally just by laughing at the wrong moment. The Persian forces were marching, confident, armed to the teeth, when out of nowhere they began hearing this low, wheezing chuckle in the wind. Weapons clattered. Soldiers turned on each other. Chaos bloomed, all because of a god who found war a bit too loud and a bit too stupid. That's Pan in a nutshell. Chaos without cruelty. Mischief without malice. He doesn't hate humans. He just thinks we're funnier when we're flailing. And nowhere did that flailing show more than in the hills of Arcadia, where shepherds used to build little huts out of sticks in desperation. They lived on cheese, olives, barley cakes, and paranoia. Every creak of a branch became a possible god. Every gust of wind a judgment. You pass one of those huts now, or what's left of it. Just a ring of mossy stones and a collapsed lintel beam. But the scent of time still lingers, and faint carvings remain. Crude flutes, curled horns, what might be a goat or a confused attempt at a man's face. This was once a place of offerings. Pan pauses, picks up a pebble from the ruins. It's shaped like a tiny hoof. Coincidence? Probably, but he tucks it into his belt anyway, because Pan likes reminders. You settle beside a tree while he sits again, idly tapping his fingers against his knee. He's remembering something. You can tell his gaze is stretched backward, toward old seasons and older songs. Back then, Arcadian herders whispered prayers not to gods of the sky, but to the god in the grass, the one who listened from the shadows, who played tunes when they wept, who appeared uninvited and left tooth marks in their cheese. Which brings us to a very quirky fringe tidbit. Some shepherds believed Pan could only be appeased by burying a chunk of fresh feta under a sycamore tree at noon. Not at night, not at dawn, noon. Why? No one agrees. Possibly because it was the 1 hour Pan never slept. Because yes, Pan does sleep, but only when he feels like it. And when he does, you'd better pray you don't disturb him. The ancients called it the noon dread. According to myth, if you made too much noise while Pan napped during the day, he would rise suddenly half dreaming, half rage, and unleash a burst of fear so pure it could drive a man mad. Livestock would scatter. Babies would scream. You would lose the names of your own children for an hour. Hence the word panic. You glance at Pan now. He's yawning. Not tired. Necessarily just bored. And boredom is dangerous in gods. He lifts his flute again. Plays a lazy tune. The notes float upward, snagging on branches. It's not a song, really. More like a complaint set to music. He misses being necessary. Once, people feared not honoring him. They built goat-shaped effigies, hung bundles of rosemary in their doorways, and carved his likeness into the base of wine jugs. But time wore that reverence down. Athens rose. Rome polished. Christianity eventually replaced goat gods with guilt-based silence. But here, in Arcadia, time limps slowly. The hills remember, the stones murmur. The trees still lean slightly, as if bowing to something invisible. Pan lies back, arms behind his head. You do too, feeling the ground breathe beneath you. And you wonder, what does it feel like to be a forgotten god in the place you were born? Probably a little like trying to fall asleep when no one's listening. You hear a distant flute now, maybe just the wind, maybe not. Pan doesn't react. His eyes are closed, but his fingers still move, tapping a rhythm on his chest. Like he's composing something he doesn't dare play yet. The night stretches long and cool around you, and sleep nudges the edge of your thoughts. But not for Pan. He's awake, always, guarding his silence with song. You wake, or maybe you were never fully asleep to the sound of soft bleating. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a small herd of goats has begun to stir. The sun isn't up. Not quite, but the world has started to hum again. In Arcadia, dawn never bursts. It leaks. Pan is already on his feet. He walks without sound. Somehow, despite the hooves, his eyes scan the slope below where a cluster of shepherd huts huddle together like gossiping mushrooms. Clay walls, smoke-stained thatch, the faint clink of a wooden spoon against a pot. And goats, always goats. It's easy to forget that Pan, despite the wild reputation, was once a protector, not just of mischief in forests, but of flocks, of cheese, of the kind of domestic chaos that kept poor people from starving. You trail him down the slope. The air is heavy with morning smells, damp fur, sour milk, time crushed underfoot. A dog barks once, then shuts up, sensing something strange, something older. Pan doesn't stop at the huts. Instead, he weaves between them like a breeze. No one sees him, or if they do, they pretend not to. The older shepherds know better than to make eye contact before their second cup of barley broths. You follow him to a low stone pen where a dozen goats are waking up. One stares at Pan like it's met him before in a dream. Another tries to chew on his flute. Pan gently nudges the curious one away with his knee. Then he kneels, pulls a crumbling lump of goat cheese from his satchel, and places it on a flat stone in the pen, an offering from him to them. Because, you realize, Pan doesn't just protect goats, he loves them. Possibly more than people, definitely more than most gods do. And somewhere deep in the dusty myths, there's a line that confirms it. Pan once tried to marry a goat, or at least serenade it under a full moon. Historians still argue whether this was literal or metaphorical. Fringe scholars say there's a missing comedy play called The Bleed of Desire that explains everything. But no one's found it. Either way, it tracks. You sit on a rock as Pan finishes the cheese ritual. He stands again, brushes goat hair off his legs, and scans the hills. There's a rhythm in the way he moves, not hurried, not idle. Just tuned to a different tempo, one shaped by bleats and breezes, and the subtle shifts of shadow. One shepherd, young, barefoot, yawning, wanders out of his hut. He squints at Pan, rubs his eyes, then mutters something that sounds like "not today" and shuffles back inside. You almost laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's normal. That's the thing about Pan. People got used to him, not in the grand temple sense, more like the way you get used to background noise, or the smell of goats, always there, often unacknowledged. missed only when it's gone. Pan wanders now toward a circle of standing stones, half sunken in the grass. You recognize the spot. It's old. Older than the huts, maybe older than Pan himself. Some say this was one of his first places, a worship site before there were names or stories, just wind and hoofprints, and a deep need to belong to something wilder than prayer. He sits in the center. You do too. This is where the rituals used to happen. Not blood or smoke, just songs. Shepherds would gather at dusk and play flutes. All of them. Together, badly. The idea wasn't harmony, it was presence. That messy, clashing chorus was how they called Pan, or thanked him, or just reminded each other they weren't alone in the dark. Imagine that. A faith made of noise. Pan doesn't play now, but you know he hears it. In his head, in the soil, that old, off-key, slightly panicked music of people trying. That's the part he misses. You think, not the worship, the trying. There's a story half true, half whimsy about a time Pan vanished for a decade. No one heard his flute. No herds scattered. The forests felt flat. Some said he'd died. Others said he'd moved to Crete for a sabbatical. But one lonely herder, a man with one sheep and no rhythm, kept playing. Every night, same tune, off-key, unapologetic. And on the 10th year, the wind carried a single note back. Pan wasn't gone, just listening. And maybe that's what you're doing too. You look at Pan now. He doesn't smile. Gods don't, really, but he softens. The flute rests in his lap, his fingers twitching slightly ready, always, to break the silence if it dares to stay too long. The goats begin to settle again. One lies across Pan's foot. He lets it. The sky brightens. The trees sigh. Somewhere in the distance, a bird forgets its song halfway through and just gives up with a chirpy shrug. Pan plays one note. Just one, thin, sleepy, and the forest listens. You don't realize you've been humming until Pan gives you a look, half amused, half finally. You stop. Shrug. He snorts through his nose like a horse trying not to laugh. Then, without a word, he stands and starts walking again. You follow, of course. The path winds downward now, toward a ravine veiled in mist and old ivy. It's darker here. The light slants differently. Even the birds seem reluctant to sing. You get the sense you're entering story territory, the kind of place where myths get sharp edges and no one wants to be the main character. Pan's pace slows. His shoulders tense. And that's when you feel it too. The air thickens. The silence doesn't rest. It repeats. A voice, just out of range, loops back itself. A murmur trapped in its own echo. You've reached her place. Echo. She's not a goddess. Not quite a ghost. More like a recording that won't stop playing. Her name, like syrinx, threads through Pan's story like ivy around stone, twisting, pulling, clinging. Once, long ago, according to the poets, and at least 3 very dramatic amphora paintings, Echo was a nymph who talked too much, not in a bad way, just constantly. She loved conversation, craved it, filled every silence with warmth and commentary, and probably about 6 kinds of gossip. Zeus, the king of badly thought-out disguises, used her to distract his wife Hera while he snuck off with other nymphs. Echo kept Hera busy with endless chatter. It worked until it didn't. When Hera found out she didn't smite Zeus, that would have made too much sense. Instead, she cursed Echo. From then on, the nymph could only repeat what she last heard. No new words, no jokes, no interruptions, just fragments, copies, ghosts of conversation. And that's where Pan found her. Some say he pitied her. Others say he loved her. The fringe theory. They both just wanted to be heard and both were terrible at listening. Pan played, Echo repeated. It was awkward. Not quite a duet, more like a sound check that never ended. Pan, whose whole existence thrived on improvisation and chaos, grew impatient. Echo, trapped in a loop, couldn't answer questions or laugh at his jokes unless he said them first. One version of the myth says Pan grew angry, that in his frustration, he shattered her body, scattering her voice across the mountains where it still rebounds today. Another version says she simply wandered into a cave and never left, too tired to repeat anything else. Historians still argue whether this myth represents the loss of dialogue in favor of ritual repetition or just an ancient PSA about listening skills. But here's what matters now. You're in her ravine, and her voice is still here. Pan stands at the edge of the drop-off, eyes closed. The mist moves around him like breath. He lifts his flute, plays a few tentative notes, and then you hear it. A pause, a beat, and then the echo, not the same notes, but close, warped, bent, like a memory retelling itself incorrectly on purpose. Pan plays again, louder this time. The ravine answers, and suddenly, you're inside a conversation between a god and his guilt. Because that's what this is, isn't it? Echo is the sound of not being forgiven, of being almost understood. Pan plays faster now, not joyfully, urgently. He pushes the notes out like he's trying to prove something, or summon something. The flute stutters. He stops. Silence. Then, one. Final. Echo. Just 3 notes. Bent. Wounded. Familiar. Pan exhales sharply, lowers the flute. You can't tell if he's satisfied or sad. Probably both. He turns to you, gestures toward a cluster of flat stones at the ravine's edge. You sit. The rock is cool beneath you, damp. You wonder how many others have sat here, listening for answers that never came, or for questions that no longer mattered. Pan paces behind you. The flute stays quiet, but his fingers twitch again. They always do. He pulls something from his satchel. A necklace, woven from vine and bone. At the center, a single reed cracked, weathered, maybe from one of Echo's last places. He hangs it from a low branch, and then he leaves it. Pan, the hoarder of flutes, the collector of sounds, leaves this one behind. Maybe for her, maybe for the next voice that forgets how to speak. You watch him walk back up the path, silent now. No music, no footsteps, just the steady retreat of someone who's decided to stop chasing echoes. You follow again. The ravine fades behind you, but the sound it lingers, softly, repeating your last thought. Your last thought. Just once. Then it vanishes. You climb slowly now, trailing behind Pan through a forest that doesn't feel entirely awake or entirely real. The light is hazy, like the world hasn't made up its mind yet. Is it dawn? Is it dusk? Or is it just one of those mythological in-between hours when time loops back on itself, shrugs, and goes out for wine? Pan knows this terrain. He walks like someone who's been here in dreams. His flute swings gently at his side, not played, not forgotten, just there. A talisman, a threat, a lullaby. Depending on who's listening, you crest a ridge, and suddenly the world opens up below you. A wide, sunlit meadow ringed with oaks and ancient stones. There's nothing threatening about it at first glance. It's beautiful, peaceful. Birds are singing. Flowers nod politely in the breeze. And yet, Pan freezes. His ears twitch. His nostrils flare. He knows this place. Fears it. Maybe. You step beside him, and that's when you feel it too. That sharp little pulse behind your eyes. That itchy, invisible warning that you've crossed into a place where even the goats don't nap. This is the noon field, not famous, not mapped, but whispered about in goat herder circles and the occasional cracked marginalia of bored Roman scribes. Pan's nap zone. See? While most gods held a power in temples or oceans or dramatic mountaintops, Pan's domain was stranger, narrower. A single hour, a single mood, noon, specifically when he was asleep. You sit in the grass, so does Pan, but his posture changes. He's tense now, quiet. You've reached the part of the myth where you don't touch anything, where the rules shift, and the usual tricks, flutes, charm, bleeding, stop working. Long ago, the ancients feared this time more than storms, because if you made any noise while Pan slept, snapped a twig, sneezed, told a joke, you risked waking him, and Pan woken suddenly. That was where panic was born. The word itself, panikondema, meant the terror of Pan. Sudden, baseless, the kind of fear that arrives like a lightning strike to the spine. Unexplainable, unreasonable, utterly real. Historians still argue whether this myth was literal, metaphorical, or simply a shepherd's excuse for dropping all his cheese in a ditch. But the stories remain. One man laughed too loudly near this meadow and forgot his own name for 2 days. Another sneezed while chewing olives and ran straight into a pond, screaming about invisible wolves. Entire herds have been known to stampede into trees for no reason at all, just because someone whistled at the wrong time. You can almost feel it now. The air thickens, bees hover, then veer away. Even the shadows go quiet. Pan leans down. You panic. But no, he's not sleeping. Not yet. Just thinking about it, which, for him, is dangerous enough. There's a quirky fringe theory that Pan's sleep was so powerful it created miniature time loops, that during his nap, things could repeat conversations, dreams, even entire weather patterns until he woke up again and reset them with a yawn. There's no proof, obviously, but also no disproof. And one goat did reportedly give birth to the same kid 3 times before someone fixed the timeline. Pan shifts again. His eyes flutter closed. His chest rises and falls. The flute lies across his belly. Completely still. You hold your breath, and then snap, not from you, somewhere in the woods. A twig. Loud, sharp. Pan's eyes open, and everything changes. The meadow darkens. Just slightly. The birds stop. The wind stutters like it forgot its lines. Pan sits up, and something you can't see it, but you feel it spreads out from him like a pulse. A ripple in the air. It doesn't push or pull. It just inverts everything. Like gravity forgot which direction to go for half a second. You grip the grass. It feels too real, too bright, too sharp. And then he exhales, just one long breath, and the field resets. The trees sway again. A bird resumes its song. The fear slips away. Pan rubs his face, looks mildly annoyed. Not at you, just, in general, at existence, at how it never lets him rest for long. He doesn't speak. He doesn't play. He just sits there, wide awake now, looking out across a field that no longer dares to disturb him. You lean back, heart finally slowing. Your body remembers panic, even if your mind can't explain it. That's the trick of Pan. You never see the terror. You just feel it, for no reason. And later, when it fades, you laugh nervously and blame the breeze. Pan stands, flute in hand. No music. You both leave the meadow in silence. The path curls like spilled ribbon through the trees, narrowing as it climbs. Pan moves slower now, not tired, just thoughtful. You can tell when a god is remembering something they'd rather forget. You're heading toward the mountain, not Olympus. Don't get excited. This one's lower, Dustie, shaped more like a misplaced elbow than a throne. But still, it matters, because this is where Pan was invited to a party once, a real one, with gods, with wine, with golden goblets and ambrosia and passive-aggressive harp music. He didn't get many invites, but one year, during the great festival of Dionysus, yes, that Dionysus, the party guy with the grape accessories, Pan got an official scroll, wax seal, ribbon, the whole thing. Apparently, someone thought it would be amusing to let the wild god attend Olympus for the night. So he went. But here's the thing about Pan. He doesn't do Olympus well. He showed up barefoot, hair unbrushed, smelling aggressively of pine sap, goat sweat, and something citrusy that might have been fermented oranges. He wore a wreath of moss. He brought cheese as a gift, unwrapped cheese. The gods were polite, in the way you are when a raccoon crashes your brunch and starts drinking mimosas. Historians still argue whether this banquet incident actually happened or was just an allegory for rustic gods being replaced by more polished ones. Either way, it became a favorite subject of vase painters, who clearly loved a good visual of Pan double-fisting goblets while Apollo glares in the background. Pan, of course, thought it went fine. He played his flute, told jokes, asked Hera if she'd ever danced barefoot in a thunderstorm. She had not, and she was not amused. He challenged Hermes to a race and lost spectacularly. He offered to improve the lyre with goat-hide drum loops. At one point, he tried to teach Athena how to yodel. That was not well received. The real breaking point came when he climbed onto the golden banquet table, kicked over a bowl of figs, and gave an impromptu flute solo that accidentally summoned a herd of wild boars indoors. It wasn't entirely his fault. The boars just liked the key of B minor. But still, after that, he wasn't invited back. You reach a crumbled archway now barely visible beneath ivy and bird droppings. It is the last trace of the temple they built for that feast, or, as later priests called it, the mistake of Pan. He stands before it, just stares. No one speaks, not even the trees. Eventually, he sits on a chunk of broken marble, legs folded, The flute rests beside him. He doesn't look upset, just resigned, like someone remembering a party where they danced too hard and everyone stopped texting them afterward. You sit too. Because here's the thing. Pan didn't belong on Olympus, not because he wasn't divine enough, or powerful enough, or handsome enough, though. Let's be honest, he did smell like mushrooms. He didn't belong because Olympus wasn't made for gods like him. It was made for order, for pedigree, for predictable glory and clean lines and good posture energy. Pan is chaos, wildness in its purest form. Not evil, just uncontrollable. And Olympus doesn't do well with uncontrollable, so he left, or was escorted out. Either way, he returned to Arcadia with a half-eaten pomegranate in one hand and a fresh ache in his chest that even the flute couldn't smooth out. A quirky tidbit. For years after the banquet, local shepherds held their own version of the party every midsummer. They called it the real banquet. Everyone brought whatever food they had, drank too much wine, and let their dogs chase each other through olive groves while someone played flute badly. Pan always showed up for those. You look at him now, sitting in the shadow of broken columns. His eyes are distant, but there's no bitterness, just a quiet awareness that some doors stay closed, and not all songs get encores. He stands again, slowly, brushes marble dust off his thighs. Then he plays just a short riff, a joke, maybe a melody that sounds suspiciously like a mocking impression of lyre music. It echoes once, flat against the stone. You both laugh. Because what else can you do? Even gods get ghosted. Pan doesn't speak, he never does, but something in the angle of his shoulders tells you he's done reminiscing. That Olympus detour, with all its wine-soaked awkwardness and marble judgment, is firmly in the past. He's walking faster now, downhill, back into the weeds. And this time, he's taking you somewhere strange. You've seen the sacred groves, you've heard the flutes, but now you're slipping into a place between stories, somewhere colder, quieter, more suspiciously damp. A cave mouth yawns ahead, and sprawled across the rock outside is something odd. Footprints. Not just any footprints. Hoof-shaped. Deep, too deep for casual walking. Almost like someone stomped their way through myth and left evidence. Pan kneels beside one. He touches it, gently, reverently. Because here's where things get weird. Even by Pan standards, some people think he's a god, others think he's an archetype. But a certain niche crowd of scholars, mostly the kind who collect owl bones and mutter to themselves at conferences, believes Pan was real. Not metaphor, real. Real. Their proof. Hoofprints. Hundreds of them. Across Greece, in impossible places, inside temples, atop cliffs, carved into ancient staircases, a few in modern basements that used to be meadows, always the same shape, same spacing, same twist at the toe like someone pirouetted mid-panic. They call it the Pan Trail. Historians still argue whether it's a hoax, a lost shepherd cult, or just a prank involving clever carving and mushrooms. But once you've seen a dozen identical hoof marks inside a sealed tomb, you stop assuming pranksters and start whispering about footprints of the forgotten. Pan knows them all. He leans closer, blowing dust out of the groove. Then, without a word, he enters the cave. You follow. It's low-ceilinged, cold, smells like wet stone and goat hair. The walls are slick with moss. Your breath clouds in front of you. Then glow, faint, greenish, like moss that learned to shimmer. On the walls, carvings, flute shapes, horned silhouettes, scribbled words in forgotten alphabets. This isn't a tourist cave. This is archive. This is where Pan keeps the memories that no one asked to remember. Every mark here is a story. A place where someone once played a note, made an offering, ran in fear, or cried into the grass without knowing why. Pan walks the cave like a librarian, tapping spots with his flute, pausing in front of an etching of a boy playing music to a goat. It's crude, more scribble than art, but the emotion is clear. You feel it even now. Please don't leave me alone with the silence. That was always the root of it. Pan isn't the god of wildness because he likes freedom. He's the god of wildness because it's where the noise lives. Back in the cave, you stumble on a strange object, a twisted piece of metal shaped like a modern harmonica, etched with ancient runes. You hold it up, Pan nods. You can keep it. Just don't play it. Not here. Not now. Deeper in. The walls grow tighter. You see hoofprints again, this time climbing up the rock. Not embedded. Embedded and scorched. As if whoever left them was moving fast. Desperate. Fleeing something invisible. Pan brushes his fingers along one, then stops in front of a final chamber. At the center sits a statue. It's him, but different, taller, meaner. The eyes are hollow. The horns curve sharply back. One hand grips a shattered flute. The other holds nothing but... You get the sense it wants to. This is not the sleepy goat god of pasture jokes. This is panic. Incarnate. A fringe theory popular in exactly one paranoid Reddit thread claims Pan has a twin, not a brother, a mirror, the part of him that emerges when he's ignored for too long. When the forests go silent, when the flutes stop, they call him Scotus Pan Shadow Pan. No temples, no offerings, just a pulse in the dark that makes prey bolt before they see the predator. Pan stands in front of the statue now. He doesn't touch it. He just stares. And for a moment, you get it. Why he plays? Why he must? Because silence doesn't just scare him, it summons something else. And if that something ever takes over, the panic won't be metaphor. Pan turns. He's done here. So are you. As you step back into the fresh night air, your ears ring slightly not from noise, but from its absence. The kind of emptiness that follows you home. Pan walks on, flute in hand, leaving the hoofprints to fade behind him. Because someone has to make the music, or something else will come for the quiet. You don't speak for a long time after leaving the cave. The forest feels different now. Not unfriendly, just aware. Like it knows what you've seen, and it's watching to make sure you don't say the wrong thing. Pan says nothing either, but he's humming, softly, a low, rattling breath melody that sounds like it's made of twigs and wine and memory. You can tell it's not a song for joy. It's a warding tune, a signal to the trees and shadows. I'm still here. Don't wake the other one. The path bends towards a ridge, and beyond it, civilization. You see roofs, Roman roofs, tiled, terracotta, smug. And for the first time tonight, Pan hesitates. You feel it. In the way he stops short at the edge of the clearing. One hoof half lifted like he's stepping into something sticky. Because this is where the stories change. This is where Rome took the flute out of his mouth and handed him a fig leaf. See? Pan didn't vanish when the Greeks fell. The Romans adopted him. Sort of. They renamed him Faunus, a forest spirit. Less scary. More decorative. No longer a god who could make armies run in terror. Now, he was a cheerful woodland mascot. The guy who helped crops grow and inspired awkward poems about goat legs in springtime. The flute stayed. The horns stayed. But the panic, smoothed over, turned into mischief. Rome didn't want wildness. It wanted orderly wildness. Something that looked rustic but behaved itself at dinner. Pan became background. Statues of him playing the flute popped up in gardens. He appeared in mosaics, chasing nymphs who were never truly afraid. He was softened, curved, painted with wine-stained smiles instead of wind-bitten sneers. Historians still argue whether this transformation was spiritual or purely aesthetic, but either way, it worked. Pan was no longer a threat. He was pastoral. Rome loved that word. It made them feel poetic while enslaving half the continent. You follow him now down a slope where grapevines stretch in prim little rows, and olive trees have been told where to stand. In the distance, a villa glows with torchlight. There's laughter, music, human music, harps, controlled, graceful, correct. Pan bristles. He doesn't hate music. He hates precision. You duck behind a low stone wall as he creeps toward the edge of the estate. Through the columns, you glimpse a fresco, Faunus, smiling, playing his flute while a well-dressed couple reclines on cushions. A dog snores beside them. The real Pan is 15 feet away, covered in dust and memory, and no one inside has any idea. That's how it's been for centuries. They use his face, but not his fear. They love the idea of Pan, the flute, the vines, the soft mythology of love and laughter, but not the chase. Not the sweat, not the echo screaming in the ravine. Pan stares at the fresco for a long time. Then, slowly, he lifts his flute. You panic slightly, but he doesn't blow. He leans it against the wall, a tiny rebellion, because if they want the image of Pan, they can keep it, but the music, that's his. He turns back to the woods, You go with him. There's a quirky tidbit in an old Roman letter, possibly forged, definitely dramatic, that claims Emperor Tiberius once banned goat-footed hymns from being played within city walls. Too dissonant, too strange, too unsettling. But apparently, at night, he kept a flute by his bedside, just in case. Pan's never needed temples. He's lived in back doors, between breaths, in the crackle of branches, and the weird moment right before you fall asleep when the wind sounds like it's whispering your name. He doesn't need Rome's approval. He was here first, and he'll be here long after the mosaics have faded. You're back in the trees now. The air smells like pine and unfinished stories. Pan doesn't smile, but he plays a short tune. Clumsy, honest, wrong in all the right places. And somewhere behind you, a torch sputters out in that Roman villa, like even fire knows who truly owns the night. By now, your feet ache in that dreamlike way, more like memory than pain. The forest has thickened again, greener, older, softer around the edges. You feel like you're being pulled backward through time, not just space. And the farther you go with Pan, the more it feels like he's not leading you anymore, just drifting like a leaf caught in the echo of something heavier. Ahead, a crumbling stone arch, not Greek, not Roman, medieval. You raise an eyebrow. Pan rolls his eyes. Because this part of the story gets weird. It starts with snoring, more specifically, with demonic snoring. According to several suspiciously melodramatic monastery records from the 12th century, monks began reporting strange invisible creatures interrupting their nighttime prayers. Loud grunts, growling exhalations. One scribe wrote of a beast that breathes like a man possessed, yet cannot be seen nor silenced. Spoiler, it was snoring. But not everyone believed that. In fact, an entire branch of monastic architecture evolved from trying to stop it. Look around. These ruins you've reached, now moss-covered, windowless, strangely angled, are what remained of a sleep cloister, a place where monks took vows of silence not just in speech, but in breathing. The walls were curved to bounce sound away from the sleeping bodies. The ceilings were designed to trap murmurs and funnel them upward into tiny stone towers that no one ever entered. Pan wanders through the ruins with a half-smile, because they weren't trying to silence each other. They were trying to silence him. You see, the monks believed Pan was still out there lurking in the margins, not as a god anymore, but as a disruption, a memory, a sound they couldn't unhear. And when a monk snored, they thought it was him, his breath, his spirit, his flute in their dreams. Some even called it Pan's breath, a medieval diagnosis for night terrors and sleep paralysis. They believed if you heard distant fluting at night and responded even just by waking up, you'd become infected with restlessness, doomed to wander, to hum, to twitch your fingers like you're always about to play. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether these tales were early descriptions of sleep disorders or just dramatic cover stories for monks who snuck wine after curfew. But Pan, he leans against a crooked column now and chuckles, because they weren't wrong. Not really. You explore the ruins a bit. Find a stone bed, yes, actual stone where a monk once slept flat as parchment, afraid to roll over. There's an etching beside it, a crude goat, mid-yawn, with one eye open. Pan traces it with a claw, and for a moment, you see it from his side. Not the flute, not the forest, the loneliness. How terrifying it must be to be remembered only as an interruption, to be reduced from wild god to sleep demon, to go from flute songs in the wind to a grunt no one claims. There's a broken bell nearby. Pan kicks it lightly. It pings once. Clear, small, beautiful, and immediately, two crows scatter from the trees. You laugh. Pan doesn't. He just lifts his flute, plays 3 notes, and the ruins fall silent again. Not just quiet, hushed, reverent, because deep down, the stones remember, the moss remembers, even the monks, wherever they are now, probably remember beneath their sermons and soot that once a god passed through here barefoot and bored, asking only to not be erased. There's a quirky tidbit carved into a cathedral ledger in France that claims Pan visited during a lightning storm, entered the nave dripping wet, and offered to tune the organ. The priest reportedly fainted. The story ends with a mysterious crop failure, 300 panpipes found under a pew, and the phrase "fluted mischief" scratched into the bell tower. You know what? That feels real. Pan walks on. You pass through one final arch, and the trees close behind you like curtains. The monastery disappears. No footprints, no sound. Just one long exhale from the forest, like it's forgiven something. Or maybe just stopped pretending it forgot. The forest has changed again, not in shape, but in tone. The trees stand taller now, somber. The wind hushes itself before brushing the leaves. Even Pan seems quieter, as if each step he takes is a sentence he's been dreading to finish. You've entered enemy territory, because just beyond this stretch of woods, just past that row of ancient cypress, stands a structure that once called itself holy. A church, stone walls, iron bells, tall crosses that still throw shade at the hills. Pan calls home. This is where things stop being funny. Because while Rome softened Pan into a wine mascot, Christianity sharpened him into something else entirely. The devil. See, when early Christians started organizing their theology, they ran into a branding problem. They needed to define what was sacred and just as urgently, what was not. And Pan. Pan was not. He was rural. He was pagan. He was unpredictable and hairy and loud, and suspiciously good at making young women dance, so they took his horns, his hooves, his grin, his wild eyes, and they rebranded him as Lucifer's mascot, the devil in the woods, the horned tempter, the flute-wielding corrupter of morals and nap time. Historians still argue whether this was a calculated smear campaign or just theological recycling at its laziest, but the outcome was clear. Pan's image was demonized. Literally, gone was the playful shepherd god of Arcadia. In his place, the red-skinned villain from every Sunday sermon, now accessorized with fire and guilt. You cross the threshold into the old church ruins now, roof long gone, walls half collapsed, the altar choked with ivy. Pan doesn't stop, doesn't blink. He's seen worse. On the stone floor lies a mosaic, cracked, faded, but the image is unmistakable. A horned figure, flute in hand, being dragged into a pit by angels wielding spears. Pan steps onto it like it's just a patch of dirt. Because what else can he do? You stand beside him, reading the Latin inscription at the bottom. It's barely legible, but one phrase survives. Beware the fluted one. Quirky tidbit. A bishop in 1320 once issued an official ban on unstructured music in churches, declaring it a gateway to goatish disobedience. The scroll still survives. It's mostly unreadable due to wine stains. Pan glances upward now. The clouds have gathered, not dramatically, just enough to dim the light, to mute the colors. His fingers twitch near his flute, but he doesn't play. Instead, he walks up to the crumbling altar. You follow? The altar is simple stone, cold, pitted, probably used for years to rest bread, wine, maybe the occasional fearful offering. But now, there's a small flute resting on it. You blink. It's not his. Too clean. Too short. The holes are evenly spaced, mathematically perfect. Sterile. Pan picks it up, examines it, snorts. It's a church flute used in sacred choirs. Pure tones. No bending. No grief. He blows one note. It's flawless and completely soulless. Then, without ceremony, he drops it. The sound it makes as it hits the floor is flat, embarrassed. You don't cheer. You just exhale. Because that note, it wasn't a challenge. It was a warning. Pan turns from the altar and leaves the ruin behind, not angrily, just with the weary understanding of someone who's been mispronounced for 2,000 years. As you trail him out, the wind picks up slightly. One of the old bells still hanging above the entrance creaks, then rings just once, low, unsteady. Pan looks back over his shoulder and smirks, because even their bells remember his name. You descend now into dusk. The trees blur into silhouettes, soft-edged and half-dreamed. The birds go quiet. Even Pan walks softer, like he's trying not to disturb something he's spent centuries tiptoeing around. This part of the forest doesn't have a name, because no one remembers to name the places where gods go to disappear. You sense it before you see it. That slow hum beneath your feet, not a sound. Exactly, more like a pull, like the land itself is trying to sigh, but doesn't have lungs anymore. And there, at the end of the path, is the cave, not a shrine, not a ruin, just a gaping mouth in the stone, fringed with moss, half concealed by roots that seem too deliberate to be random. Pan stops. You do too, because you already know what this is. The cave where Pan died. Or so the story goes. There's an old sailor's tale, passed down from a letter written in the reign of Emperor Tiberius. A ship somewhere in the Aegean. Calm sea, clear sky, and then a voice, deep, unseen. Tell them, the great god Pan is dead. The crew froze. The wind died. One sailor fainted. Another dropped his oar into the sea. The captain, trembling, swore he'd heard it too. They docked, told the villagers, word spread, and just like that, Pan was gone. Or so the Romans believed. Historians still argue whether this was the death of an era, a metaphor for the fall of paganism, or just an early case of group auditory hallucination brought on by fermented anchovies. But here's a quieter, stranger theory. The kind whispered in the backs of libraries by people who've stared too long into goat eyes. Pan didn't die, he left. Not out of rage, out of exhaustion, out of grief, out of silence. You step closer to the cave, inside. It's barely visible. No torch would hold here. The shadows seem to eat the light before it even flickers. Pan doesn't enter. He just stands at the edge, because this isn't his tomb. It's his safe house, his retreat, where he hid when Olympus laughed, when Rome forgot, when the bells of churches rang louder than his flute. A fringe theory, half folklore, half wishful thinking, suggests Pan retreated underground not just metaphorically, but physically, that he's still there, deep in the stone veins of the earth, playing soft notes into the cracks of the world, that his music keeps roots growing, rivers shifting, caves echoing in just the right places to make you feel less alone. You crouch now, brush aside the vines, and feel it. Warmth, not from fire, from breath, the kind that stays long after the lungs have stopped. Pan kneels, lays his flute at the entrance. He doesn't play, he just offers, because even gods need to remind themselves they're still part of something bigger, that they once mattered, that they still do. You wait in silence, and then very faintly from deep within the cave, a note, not a human note, not even quite a flute, just a sound that says, I hear you, I remember. Pan doesn't react. He doesn't need to. He stands, brushes the dust from his knees, and for the first time all night, he looks relieved. Because now you know, he never died. He just stepped sideways, waited, listened, played only when the world forgot how, and now, with the moon rising behind him, Pan walks away from the cave not as a ghost, but as a god with no temple, no worship, just a flute, and the terrifying kindness of someone who plays anyway. The moon has fully risen now, round and heavy above the trees. It casts long shadows across the forest floor, your shadows, and Pan's. One shaped like a person, the other harder to define. Twisted horn, uneven leg, flute in hand. But only one of you is still playing, and it's not him. Pan walks in silence, not solemnly, just done. There's a lightness to his steps now, like some old burden got dropped at the mouth of that cave. And maybe it did. You wind through a forest that starts to look a little too familiar. A clearing you passed hours ago. A fallen tree you stepped over twice. A stream whose song doesn't quite match its flow. You're looping, and you know why. Because this is the part of the story that repeats. You see, Pan isn't just a character in old myths. He's a circuit, a sound that returns when silence stretches too far. People keep hearing him in whispers, in sleep, in dreams that end with running and hooves. Modern hikers, campers, wanderers, they all have stories. You've heard them. A girl in the Alps who claims she woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the sound of distant fluting. Not music, just breath through wood. She followed it, found a clearing, found hoofprints. She was alone. A couple in rural Crete who swore their baby stopped crying only when they played a certain dissonant melody. The same one they both somehow dreamed the night before. A bus driver in northern Italy who still won't talk about why he pulled over for 20 minutes on a moonless night, stepped into the forest, and came back laughing so hard he cried. He retired 3 days later. And of course, your story, the one you're living now. You walk with a god who once caused armies to flee, who got kicked out of Olympus, mistaken for us, or the devil, blamed for snoring, and declared dead by a sailor with bad timing. And yet here he is, picking up pine cones, humming a tune with no beginning. Because Pan never stays gone, People need him. Not to pray to remember. There's a scholarly paper self-published and full of footnotes that lead nowhere, that suggests Pan is what happens when humans try to make sense of noise, of fear, of wanting something you can't quite name. He's the tension in a violin string, the skipped heartbeat in a nightmare, the breath before a scream or a kiss. He's the pause that makes you realize how quiet the world can get before it turns on you. You pass a tree now with an old carving in its bark, a clumsy flute, a hoof print, a heart. Below it, a date, 1994. Pan stops. He touches the carving, smiles, because someone remembered. Someone carved that years ago, maybe after a half-dreamed encounter, maybe just to mark something real they couldn't explain. That's the thing about Pan sightings, they're never clean, never Instagrammable. No one gets a selfie. Just the aftertaste of adrenaline and wood smoke and that sinking suspicion you weren't quite alone in that field after all. Pan walks again. He's humming louder now, not joyful, not sad, just there. A sound against the dark, because the dark is growing again. Night's full weight settling in, the forest begins to lean inward, branches arching like ribs. You're almost back where you started, but different. The air's changed. The silence feels less hollow. You're ready now. Pan leads you to one last clearing. At its center, a stone circle, simple, ancient, possibly just a place where the grass gave up. But to him, it's enough. He steps inside it, lifts his flute, plays one note, and all the night holds its breath, because here it comes, the ending. But not the ending, just another loop. You sit beside him now, listening. The trees don't move, the wind forgets to blow, the stars lean down just a little, and Pan keeps playing. For the lost, for the silent, for the part of you that can't sleep without noise. You don't know how long you sit there, maybe hours, maybe seconds. Time does strange things near gods, especially the forgotten ones. Pan's melody spirals outward not to impress, not to perform, just to be. It drifts through the branches, hovers over sleeping roots, curls inside the cracks of stones that haven't been touched in 1,000 years. You lie back in the grass, finally letting your eyes close, not from exhaustion, but trust. And maybe that's what Pan wanted all along. Not worship, not temples, just someone willing to fall asleep near him without fear. Because here's the secret. He's scared too, not of death, not of gods, of silence. True, empty silence. The kind that swallows memory. That erases not just the sound, but the reason to make it. That's why he plays. Not to celebrate, to survive. There's a story buried in an 18th century footnote, misfiled under folklore and pestilence, about a plague village where only one house was untouched. Locals said it was protected by a man who played a flute day and night without stopping. They say he disappeared the moment the final note was played, left behind. A field of hoofprints and a flute made of twisted bark, still warm to the touch. No one ever found him, but they kept the flute. Pan plays softer now, the kind of playing that means, I remember you, I forgive you, I'm not leaving yet. And you feel something shift inside you, a loosening, not relief, not clarity, just space. Space for the parts of yourself that only speak when no one's watching. Space for mistakes, for joy, for grief that does not want fixing, for fear that needs a lullaby. You sit up, Pan lowers the flute, not because he's done, because he knows you're ready. You won't forget him. Not now, not anymore. He smiles not wide, not goatishly, just enough to crease the corner of one eye. Then he turns and fades into the trees. No sound, no goodbye, just the quiet hush of wildness retreating. But before the forest closes, you think just maybe you hear a final note. Bent, broken, beautiful. And now, all that's left is the wind. The forest begins to soften. Branches relax their grip on the sky. Leaves settle into stillness. Even the stones seem to sink deeper into the earth, like they're tucking themselves in. You're lying in the grass, where Pan played. The flute is quiet now, but the sound lingers not in the air, but in you. A soft pressure behind the ribs, a hum that says you've been somewhere older than memory. And you're safe. Breathe in slowly. Let the moss-sweet air drift into your chest. Let it remind you that fear doesn't always need to be chased away. Sometimes it just wants company. Sometimes it wants a song. The stars above pulse gently, not as eyes watching, but as reminders. You are not forgotten. You are not alone in the stillness. Somewhere, something with hooves and music and a heart shaped like forest breath is still walking, still playing, still keeping the silence from swallowing too much. Breathe out. Let your shoulders fall. Let your mind wander. Let the roots of the world rise gently around you. There's nothing left to fear tonight. No gods demanding worship. No myths asking to be solved. Just the dark, the warm kind, the safe kind. The kind Pan guards with a flute and a sigh. Sleep now. The wind will remember your name, and if you ever wake afraid, just hum. He'll hear it, and he'll play back.